Picking up a win in Warzone is not an easy thing to do. You need to be on top of your game, able to outsmart, outposition and outplay every single enemy that you're faced with. Winning a match is a test of pure skill. You need to know how to constantly make the best out of every situation that you're faced with, and how to give yourself an advantage whenever possible. If you know how to do this, and can adapt to the different challenges of Warzone, then you'll be in the best position possible for pulling off a win. This video will be breaking down a Warzone duo's win, and giving you a guide on how you can replicate our success. I'll be covering our tactics that we use when approaching this game, as well as general tips and tricks that can give you an advantage over your enemies in just about every situation. There were plenty of times in this game when we were faced with a difficult situation, as well as instances when we were at a major disadvantage. But we still came out on top, and I think that this gameplay can serve as a great example of how the right playstyle can deliver you a win in Warzone, no matter what you're up against. Our ring was positioned over prison, with the majority of the safe zone out of bounds. We decided to land in Boneyard, as it was away from the flight path and even further away from the zone. The idea was that this would let us loot up in peace, getting ourselves the loadouts and equipment we would need for the game. We'd intended to complete these recons as well, but there wasn't a lot of point with the ring, as there was a very limited area in which the safe zone could fall in. We found ourselves accompanied by an enemy team, and opted to start applying pressure straight away. By immediately laying down damage against this team, we're able to force them into a much worse position. Downing a player pressured the remaining enemy to go for the revive, which allows us to close down the distance between us. As it's early game, we know this team don't have a lot of loot and are unlikely to be able to re-armor. For this reason, picking up the kills is incredibly easy. All we needed was a bit of patience. After this, I made quick use of a recon drone to scan the surrounding area. A major perk of landing well away from high traffic areas is that it makes early game looting much easier. We're now alone, free to loot up and complete contracts to get that all important loadout drop. Getting a helicopter as well maximises our mobility, and this is something that helped us throughout the match. We can cover vast distances very quickly, which has a wide variety of useful applications. We had intended to finish off a few of these recons, but that didn't quite go to plan. As you can see, we started taking a hail of gunfire as soon as we arrived at this contract location. In a situation like this, it's very important to weigh up the likelihood of you coming out on top. We did have the high ground, but we were low on armour plates and didn't have much cover around. We realised that fighting this team just wasn't practical, so cutting our losses and moving on was the best option. In Warzone, knowing when not to fight is just as important as knowing how to fight. In this scenario, we simply didn't have a good enough chance of coming out on top to make pursuing the fight worth it. Thanks to our helicopter, we're free to roam around the map as we please. We can stick to areas that are unpopulated, far away from the safe zone or tactical positions. Now I'm all for hunting down enemy teams and chasing kills, but we're in a very weak position here. Not having loadouts means we're not able to approach the match how we want to, and the lack of perks creates a whole lot of problems, such as being exposed on the radar due to a lack of ghost. In order to make up some cash, I grabbed a most wanted contract. As we've got a helicopter at our disposal, staying out of the way of other enemy teams won't really be a problem. I know that these contracts are incredibly high risk, but without loadouts, we're not going to be able to make it much further in the match. It's a case of high risk versus high reward, and in this instance, our need for loadout drops is far more important than the risk of me dying. Thankfully though, our random loadout drop spawned in an ideal location. It was far out of the way and in a well covered area. This lets me grab my Growl class, as it's a reliable weapon that's effective at pretty much all ranges. I've also got a sniper secondary, so it's important that I have a gun capable of dealing with short to medium range targets. A quick tip here: if your random loadout drop is part of a group, as in there's other loadout drops besides yours, that means that an enemy team is within 200 meters of that location, and are most likely making their way toward it. To some, this may well seem like common knowledge, but it's a little nugget of information that can really affect the way you view and approach these loadout drops. Simply put, if there's one loadout drop, then don't worry about it. If there's multiple, be careful as there's enemy teams nearby. As this loadout had saved us 10,000 cash, we're able to stock up on other luxuries such as self-revives, UAVs and armour plates. After a bit of flying around, I can complete my contract, which gives us even more money to play with. The UAV this cash bought exposed an enemy team right behind us. This has been a rather quiet game for us so far, which is why we went straight after them. Notice how our push sees us both hurl stun grenades in order to create a huge advantage for ourselves. I've said before and I'll say it again, tactical grenades are overlooked in Warzone. They can completely change the dynamics of a gunfight in a split second. Now I'm downed here, but enough damage has been dealt that the remaining enemy doesn't stand a chance. It gives my teammate enough time to finish the kill and wipe out this team. I'm rather passionate about using tacticals in Warzone, so I'm going to cut away from this gameplay for a second to give this point a bit of extra time. The main tactical I see used in Warzone is a heartbeat sensor. These are great, but they're countered easily by Ghost, which 99% of players run. What's worse about them though, is that they offer a false sense of security. You can never truly rely on a heartbeat sensor, as there could always be an enemy just around the corner with Ghost, and you'll never know. With stun grenades, the only counter is battle hardened, and that is not a perk that's commonly run in Warzone. Stun grenades let you slow and disorientate your enemies. This is one of the most powerful things that you can do in Warzone. They can cripple an enemy team's ability to get to cover or even return effective gunfire, and that's a huge advantage to have. Plus, they can be used in just about any situation and in an offensive or defensive manner. They can buy you time to reapply armour or apply more pressure to enemies. I just find them far more reliable and versatile than a typical heartbeat sensor. Back to the gameplay. A recon has revealed a team nearby that we need to clear out in order to save ourselves some trouble when rotating. Here, we were caught off guard. We expected both players to be on the recon itself, but one player was inside the garage. This, and a lack of accuracy on my part, landed me straight in the gulag. You can't always predict everything right, and I rushed in without checking my surroundings properly. Always remember that just because you're a decent player doesn't mean you can charge in head first and expect to come out on top. I don't know why so many players insist on sitting in one spot in the gulag, but that's what this enemy did, which allowed me to pick up an easy kill. My teammate had wiped out the previous duo, which left me free to grab my loot and restart in relative safety. This turned out to be incredibly useful shortly after. We'd planned on using our helicopter to make a rotation towards a more defendable spot in the safe zone, but found ourselves right behind an enemy team. I had planned to use my Semtex here to simply force this player out of cover, and maybe deal a bit of damage as well. What I actually did though, was end this player's game in a pretty brutal fashion. When you're out in the open like we are, it can sometimes be a great tactic to force your enemies to move. If you can't apply gunfire when out in an exposed area, explosives can force your enemy to move out of cover. This can give you time to armour or move to a better spot yourself. Sometimes you may even get lucky like I did, and that's even better. The cash we had amassed at this point meant we could both stock up on self-revives, which are always a nice luxury to have at any point in the game. This would actually be rather important to my partner, who, about 30 seconds later, was caught out in the open and downed. One of the nicest things about a self-revive, in duos at least, is that they mean you don't have to worry about reviving at all. This means I can apply direct pressure to the enemy and, again using stun grenades, defend us effectively. In duos, getting forced to risk a revive mid-gunfight is a huge factor, as losing a player is a major disadvantage, but it does leave you unable to defend yourself. Occasionally, a self-revive can prevent this, so I would swear by them for that reason. At this point, we're rather late in the game and the player count is dwindling. With me being without a loadout, and more crucially, without Ghost, we decided a slower approach would be best for the final ring. Our helicopter had been stolen by a respawning player, so we made our progress on foot. Sticking to cover, hugging cliffs, and generally staying out of sight is best when you're trying to make a large rotation late game. We're out in the open, and really can't risk a big gunfight with no defendable area around, so we opted to sit and hide in cover until next ring revealed itself. Sometimes you need a bit of extra patience in Warzone. Rushing after kills has a time and a place. Playing tactically and waiting for the right moment to act is also important. This tactic is what brought us into the final ring. We actually ended up across a solo player simply lying in wait for us. I got wrecked inside this tunnel, but a 2 versus 1 is not an easy thing to win, and this player was dropped with relative ease. Here, my self-revive comes into its own as I can get right back on my feet and into the fight. In late rings, cover is everything. We're on the low ground, so need to play tactically to be in with a chance. You can see we both wait for the team on top of prison to parachute down into the open. This gives us the perfect opportunity to move up to a stronger position as the gas force them out of their high ground. This puts them at a huge disadvantage and gives us time to move. This is a perfect example of how you can manipulate a situation to your advantage. We forced this team out of an incredibly dominant position and wiped them out as a result. High ground is a great position to be in, unless the only way down is via a parachute. This leaves you hanging in the air, a sitting duck for any accurate player. That's exactly why we played in this way. This left us facing down a single solo player, who was simply gunned down by me for the win. There's so much variety in Warzone that it's impossible to provide a definitive answer to every situation you're faced with. Players, gas, equipment, loadouts, and so many other things can affect how the game plays out in front of you. The important thing is to recognise that you can't control everything, but that you can make a best effort to manipulate what is up to you. If you can use the right strategies, know how to turn a situation to your advantage, then you will be in the best possible position to pick up a win. These strategies come with game time and experience, and I hope this video has given you an insight into what they look like.